everyone, and welcome to today's SpouseLink Live. So, what happens to your post 9/11 GI Bill when you retire or transition out of the military? Now, you hear stories out there about service members who are unable to access this educational benefit because they either didn't understand, they didn't know before the timeline was over, or they failed to complete what they had to do before transition or retirement out of active duty service. So today, my guest is someone that I've had on previously. I'm thrilled to welcome back Kate Horrell. She's an accredited financial counselor and a military personal finance expert. And she's going to be talking all about the post 9/11 GI Bill today, including how you can maximize these educational benefits, what you need to do to transfer the benefits to a child or spouse, when that needs to happen so you don't lose these benefits in the process of transition and retirement, and how to actually use your GI Bill when the time comes. Thank you so much for joining me today for another SpouseLink live stream. If you haven't met me before, I am Anna Larson, SpouseLink Ambassador, copywriter, digital marketer, homeschool mom, retired military spouse, and an expert on helping military spouses have a better experience through transition and retirement. These live streams are for military spouses looking to connect and for support as they near a crossover into transition or retirement from the active duty military world. Now, SpouseLink was created in 2012 by AFMA, the American Armed Forces Mutual Aid Association, and their whole mission is to support, inform, and inspire military spouses around the world. So as we dive into today's topic, please leave comments, ask questions, share your experiences, and let us know where you're joining from. Not only do I value what you have to say about these topics, but we love to interact with our guests during these. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I really want to make sure that this conversation is all about the topic. I'm going to introduce Kate. Let me pull up her bio really quick so I can just tell you a little bit about her. Now, Kate, like I mentioned before, is an accredited financial counselor and a personal finance educator. She really does specialize in the military community, and she helps the military community make the most of their pay and benefits. She roamed the globe with her now retired sailor for 28 years, carting 4 kids and 2 cats wherever the Navy sent them. Now, along the way, she learned a few things about paying off debt, balancing a budget, landlording, retirement planning, paying for college, and all sorts of other money things. And the one, like I mentioned earlier, that we're going to be talking about today is going to be the post 9/11 GI Bill. So let me bring up Kate and we'll go ahead and get started. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Shouldn't complain. Nobody wants to hear it.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're having a day like mine, but Texas has gone from 110 degrees to downpour raining for the straight week, like miserable, just wet and muddy and mucky. And I'm like, enough. I need a break from this. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started, Kate, with our live stream conversation. The most important part of this conversation, which is really a brief overview of what is the post 9/11 GI Bill, and how would a service member have received this benefit?
Great question. So the post 9/11 GI Bill is an educational benefit provided to service members in return for their military service. Most service members have earned, including Guard and Reserve, have probably earned some level of the GI Bill, but it requires 36 months of full-time service to get the whole 100%. They rate it by percentages. So people will say, I have 100% of the GI Bill. And what's really important for family members is that in 2009, in an attempt to bolster retention, they made this bill transferable to eligible family members in return for a service commitment.
Okay. So there's 3 different types of, or 4 different types, I think now, of GI bills so let me just throw this question up here really quick. I'm going to put it like this. How do they know if they have the Montgomery GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill, or the forever GI Bill? And I think there's even one more that I don't have on this list. Is that correct?
That that's a great question. So there really, at this current moment in time, are really only two GI Bills. There's the Montgomery GI Bill and the post 9/11 GI Bill. The forever GI Bill and probably whatever else you're thinking of, they're the names of legislation that amended the GI Bill, the post 9/11 GI Bill, but they aren't new bills. They're just changes to the existing. So the program is the post 9/11 GI Bill. But when they make changes to it almost every year, Congress does something, and um, some of those had titles that kind of made it sound like they were new bills.
Okay, got it. So where do you look to see, do I have this? What do I have? What do I have left? Where is it that a service member or their family members are going to find the information about the GI Bill?
So there's a couple different ways, but the primary resource for service members and their families is Mail Connect. If you log into Mail Connect, the service member can do it, and then eventually, spouses and dependent children may also have their own Mail Connect accounts, or they can set them up. That is where the service member would make the transfer, and that's also where people would confirm, hey, this transfer actually happened.
Got it. Okay. And then one last question for you, kind of about the what is the GI Bill kind of conversation. But what kind of educational benefits can this be used for, Kate?
Yeah, it's a really pretty comprehensive bill. Most people think of the post 9/11 GI Bill as being for a traditional 2 or 4-year college type experience. And that is the way that most beneficiaries are using it. But it can also be used for apprenticeships, it can be used for flight training, it can be used for on the job training. There are a wide variety of different educational programs that it can cover. Now, in a family's big picture, does it make sense to use it for something like an apprenticeship? That's a different question. But these are all ways that it can be used.
This is where having somebody like you in the ring with you is so super helpful, right? Because when you are trying to maximize that benefit that you've received and paying for college versus not paying for college versus using it for this or using it for that, that's where someone like you can come in and kind of help direct and assist in a guide, like where it's going to be best used, right?
Absolutely. As an educator, I very rarely tell people what they should do, but I will ask pretty pointed questions and I will provide pieces of information to let individuals feel like they're making the best choice that they can. But I always emphasize that just like everything in life, right? You make the best decision you can with the information you have right now. And you
Yeah.
can't come back and second guess yourself later because there's no value in that.
That is wise words. I feel like that should be a t-shirt or something. You know? So, okay. So, Kate, I'm going to throw up this slide really quick because our next part of our conversation is really going to focus more on the process of transition and retirement. And when you're getting ready to leave the military, what's the timeline, the to-do list, the pertinent information that a military family needs to be thinking about when it comes to this benefit specifically? And I threw this up there. This is all information taken from the va.gov. And Kate's just going to kind of go over, I think, a little bit about transferring and using it and all of that to make sure that any service member that is nearing retirement has the opportunity to utilize this benefit, doesn't lose it, or doesn't get restricted on how they can use it, I guess is another way to say it. So take it away, Kate.
This is a super important point, particularly as you are getting ready to leave the military, because it does incur a service obligation if you transfer benefits to your family members. There are very limited exceptions, and I would never encourage anyone to assume that they're going to be eligible for an exception. The general rule about transferring the post 9/11 GI Bill is that you should transfer it as soon as you're eligible, and that's at 6 years of service. Now, sometimes you didn't know, or maybe you didn't have an eligible family member at 6 years of service, or you at that point in time didn't think you were going to stay in for another 4, so you didn't transfer. But that 4 years is really crucial. If you haven't transferred the GI Bill yet, or you've transferred it quite recently, you want to make sure to time that separation from the service so that it's after that 4 years, because there's no prorated on that 4 years. It's either you did it or you didn't. And one
Mm.
of the very frustrating things about the way this program is administered is that the VA doesn't seem to do like a records check before they start sending out the benefits. If they think you're eligible and you start using GI Bill benefits, you may get many benefits before the VA comes back and says, "Oh, sorry, you didn't do your 4 years." And now you owe the VA for all those benefits that you got in error. So
They make you repay it. Ooh,
they make you
okay.
repay it. This is so critical that service members verify that their transfer occurred, and you could do that also in Mail Connect. I encourage people, and I personally myself, once a year, I go into Mail Connect and I screenshot the transfer information, and then there's a letter in there, and I download that letter every year because this just makes me very nervous thinking about what if there was a problem. And then be incredibly sure that those 4 years were fulfilled. Um, the letter and the screenshot on Mail Connect have a date attached to them. So the math seems like it should be pretty easy, but we do hear horror stories of people who got out a week too soon. And thankfully, we're not talking about a lot of people, but even one person is a lot of people.
Yeah. And you definitely don't want that to be your family that happens to, right? Like, you
Yeah,
don't wanna be that
no.
one person that has that experience for
Now,
sure.
keep in mind too that the individual branches of service may have additional paperwork requirements on top of just doing the transfer in Mail Connect. So you need to get with your branch of service and make sure that you've done whatever your branch wants you to do.
Okay, so now question, let's pretend we're transitioning out, right? ETSing. So if you're ETSing and you have not already transferred your benefits and you've got another year left, you don't have any options here. Just very
That is
clearly and
correct.
plainly put. You have no
Now
option
let's
to hand this off to your children.
But that doesn't mean you've lost the post 9/11 GI Bill, right? The service member will retain that benefit even if they haven't transferred it to someone else. So while you can't transfer it, you didn't lose the GI Bill. You just lost the option to give it to another person.
Okay. And then can I ask one more, like,
Yep.
it's not a weird one off, but you know how there's a forced to separation occasionally with the service member's obligation, whether it be a med board or a lot they didn't rank up and then now they're being separated from service. In those situations when they cannot, there is not an option to fulfill that additional 4 years before the transfer. Again, is it just kind of should have done it sooner, get it done as fast? You know what I mean? Are they also out of luck in that sense? Am
So,
I
as I
asking?
said, there are occasionally exceptions.
Hmm.
Um, if you are in that situation, I would strongly encourage you to not only find an answer from your branch and also from the VA, but I would also encourage you to um, go back and ask like a second and third time, right? I would not trust the first answer that you get from somebody on this question because it is, while people do get separated all the time, your situation may be very unique. And you don't want to make a decision based upon an answer you got that didn't apply to your specific situation.
Okay. Hold on just a second.
I can't hear you, Anna.
So sorry. I'm so
That's okay.
sorry. This is one of those mornings where I don't. Okay, so I'm just going to pause for just a minute. if you have been on LinkedIn and waiting for the LinkedIn to start, it just started. LinkedIn.
Ooh, well, that's good.
Yes, they were not connecting earlier, and I had my LinkedIn browser open, and then all of a sudden I hear us echoing through my office, and as a, just a few seconds behind, I'm like, oh, and then I couldn't find the tab. So I apologize. I muted myself to try and find the tab to close it down. So, but yay, LinkedIn is now streaming, which I'm super thrilled about. But yes, Kate, I apologize for kind of like the weird one-off questions, but I know these are things that
No,
service members are asking. Like, what if I'm forced separated from this and I haven't had a chance? Can they still not allow me to transfer this to my children? And so I appreciate you answering, some of those weird one-offs and those weird questions but they are what's happening out there. I think,
absolutely.
yeah, I just want to draw for anyone who's just joining us right now. I just want to draw your attention to that like little green part right there. So, in order to transfer, as Kate mentioned earlier, you have to have at least 6 years of service under your belt, and you have to be able to commit to 4 more if you want to transfer those benefits to either a spouse or a child. And then we caveated this with that are in DEERS. If they're not in DEERS, they're not going to be there. So you cannot transfer it to a child you will have in the future, or a child, a child that is still cooking in the belly or something along those lines. Yeah.
So let me throw this out there though, Anna. The 4 years is when you transfer to the first person. So I have a friend who transferred to his spouse while she was pregnant, and then he was able to add his kids when they became eligible, and that didn't start the 4-year clock. So the 4-year clock starts when you make a transfer. So there are provisions to make some adjustments after that. I don't want people to think, oh, I want to wait because I haven't had my kids yet. No, 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 no. Don't do that.
So you can transfer to a spouse and then add people to that potentially afterwards as they get added into DEERS, is what you're saying then, to clarify
As
that.
long as you're still serving, yeah.
As long as you're still serving. Okay, perfect. Okay, that was a good clarification. Thank you. I think that's going to be super helpful for people just planning down the road, especially if you're a new service member now. So if somebody is nearing transition retirement and you have transferred it to a spouse currently, but you haven't added your children onto that, you can still do that even if you're just 1-2 years out from that transition or retirement process. So,
Super
okay.
important point.
Yes, that is a super important point, because I think that's where people get hemmed up and they get nervous, right? Okay, so let's move over to strategizing. Actually, before we do that, there is a second set of slides that I wanted to bring up here. I just want to go over this right now. This is directly from the va.gov, where it's talking about transferring the GI Bill. So let's talk about using the GI Bill and some of the things that are on this slide in particular. It does talk about you have to be enrolled. You can use it during a required time frame. What is this? What is the VA trying to tell us here, Kate?
Well, actually, I think I just found an error on one of the VA's websites. So that's really interesting. So I'm going to read what this says, and then I'm going to tell you what I think about that. So we've talked about, right, you have to have completed 6 years of service. You need to agree to 4 more years, and the person might be in DEERS. That's the top snip. We got that one. The bottom one is, when are you eligible to use these benefits? This says there must be an approved transfer of benefits. Yep, true. You must be enrolled in DEERS. That's actually not true, because children can use transferred benefits until they're 26, and they may or may not be enrolled in DEERS after they are 21 or 23, right? So that's a super interesting point. And then you'll use these transferred benefits during the required time frame. And if we were to be able to click on that link, it would show that there are 2 different time frames for spouses and children. As I said, children almost always have access to transferred post 9/11 GI Bill benefits until they turn 26. There's a little exception if they are serving in the military on their own. They may be able to extend that deadline a little bit. Children can't use the benefit until the service member has been in for at least 10 years. So they've, got, regardless of when they transferred, they must have served for 10 years, and they must either have graduated from high school or gotten a GED, or, they can't like start using it when they're 7. Now there is a whole nother thing. You know what? That's so obscure. We're not even going to get into that. Spouses, however, do not need to wait until 10 years of service. Spouses can start using the GI Bill as soon as it's been transferred, as early as 6 years of service. Now, obviously, there's a risk in that, right? Because of the 4-year service requirement. If a spouse, if the the benefits are transferred, let's say at 6 years of service, and the spouse starts using them immediately, they might use 3.5 years, and the service member may choose not to re-enlist, right? And now the service member probably wouldn't choose not to re-enlist at this point in time, because that would put them in a rough situation. But that's
Yeah.
something to consider for spouses. Spouses have may or may not have an expiration date on the outside end of their benefits, depending on when their service member left the service. That's what the Forever GI Bill is talking about. For older service members who got out, I'm almost positive it's the 1st of January 2013.
That sounds like a
Pretty
date that,
down sure that's right.
yeah,
They have 15 years from the service member's last date of service. That's the same deadline that the service member has to use those benefits, 15 years. But for anybody who got out after the break-off date, which we will confirm, they do not have an expiration date at all. They can use those benefits forever. And that is true for both the service member and the spouse.
got it. Okay. This has been such good information. I think that, this is one of those things that sometimes families will wait until the last minute to think about, because they just think, what's the benefit I have? And they don't realize that there are some caveats attached to utilizing this benefit. So I really appreciate you throwing this information out there. Now, as an expert in military family finances, Kate, I would love it if you could throw out some strategies for military families that they can use that allow them to maximize this GI benefit. Like, what type of things should they be thinking about as they're looking at using the GI Bill? And we talked just briefly about this before. Does it go for this program? Does it go for that program? Do I use it for this child, or do I wait and use it for that child? Does my spouse use it? Do I use it? Right? Like, what are some of those questions or strategies that you like to share with service members and their families?
I'm so glad you asked, because I feel really passionate about this. There is sort of a tendency, and it's a natural tendency, right, within the community to think, oh, first of all, there's the first tendency is that people want to save this for their kids. And I just want to point out that that's not always the highest and best use of the benefit. For example, let's say I decided that I was going to leave this personal finance world and I was going to get into data analytics, and I was pretty sure I was going to get a good, make a good salary doing this. Maybe using the GI Bill for me to go get the credentials to get this higher paying job is going to benefit our family for longer and more than saving this for my kid, who might be 5 or 10 at the moment, right? If I can get 8 or 13 years of higher pay between now and when my kid goes to college, I can pay for college and still come out ahead in the long run. So that's an important factor to consider. The other thing is that a lot of families think, oh, we have 36 months of benefits and we have 2 kids, so everybody gets 18 months and that's how we're going to do this. There's nothing wrong with that, because you're still utilizing the GI Bill and getting a lot of benefit out of it. But what if there were ways to get more benefit out of it? And what that might look
Tell
like,
me.
yeah, what that might look like is you look at the benefits that the GI Bill gives. And the 3 big ones are tuition, and tuition related things, a monthly housing allowance, and then a books allowance. Now we're going to kick the books allowance out of this equation because almost everybody gets $1,000 a year if they go full time. But what can be a very different benefit is how much the family gets covered in terms of tuition and then how much that monthly housing allowance is. And if you have two children, I'm going to make up two examples. Let's imagine that Susie decides to go to Oklahoma State and you're in state and they live in very inexpensive dorms. And Susie's twin, Sarah, goes to Golden Gate University in San Francisco, which is a private university, higher tuition, and the monthly housing allowance in San Francisco is way higher than it is in Oklahoma, right? In this made up because it makes for good numbers situation, it would absolutely make sense to use all 36 months for Sarah, getting the higher coverage of tuition, plus getting that much larger housing allowance, and then pay for Susie out of pocket. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. So does the GI, are the benefits a percentage then of what tuition is, or a percentage of what housing is, or are they using housing allowance from like military posts in the same location? Like where are these numbers coming from?
Yep. So I'm going to start with tuition because this is a lot. So the GI Bill pays either up to in-state tuition at a state school, and under federal law, in almost all cases, a student using VA benefits is going to be eligible for in-state tuition. So if it's at a state school, tuition is almost definitely covered in full. At a private school, there is a yearly cap. This year, it's about $27,000 that the GI Bill will pay in tuition at that private school. However, there are additional programs that may cover whatever isn't covered by the GI Bill. You can stack merit aid from the school. You may get some need-based financial aid, although if you're using the GI Bill, you might not. And then there's also a program called the Yellow Ribbon Program that private schools and public schools, if they're in that weird thing that you might get out of state tuition, can use. The Yellow Ribbon Program is a partnership agreement between the school and the VA. And it says that the school will contribute X number of dollars to cover that tuition that exceeds the amount of the GI Bill payment for an eligible student. And then the VA will actually match that money. What you hear about often with the Yellow Ribbon Program are what I call full Yellow Ribbon Program schools. So they offer to cover the whole gap between the $27,000 that the GI Bill pays and the amount of actual tuition, and that's split halfway between the school and the VA. There are also schools that do just a more limited amount. Maybe the school pitches in $5,000 and the VA pitches in $5,000, but that still helps cover that gap in funding. Now, schools don't have to offer the Yellow Ribbon Program to everybody who's eligible. Maybe their budget just doesn't allow for it, right? So they may offer 5 spots or 10 spots. This gets a little risky for families because they don't get to pick and choose who they give it to. The VA thinks that would be unfair. And so if you have a child who's got their school offers 10 Yellow Ribbon spots and they have 50 GI Bill students, and you can find this information all on the VA website, you need to think, oh, my kid might not get that Yellow Ribbon benefit, and how is that going to impact our family's plans?
Yeah.
So that's the tuition side. I will give another little bonus there about tuition. As I said, under federal law, a student who's using VA benefits is almost always eligible for in-state tuition at private schools. A little bonus Easter egg is that some school systems won't reclassify your student once they've gotten started. So there are many school systems in which the student can use just maybe one semester of GI Bill benefits, but they retain that in-state tuition the whole time they're in school.
Mm.
And this is part of a planning strategy to maybe you use the GI Bill for your first kid just enough to get them that in-state tuition, and then you save then you use all the rest of the benefits on kid number two's going to a private school or something like that. That was a lot, Anna. Did you get all that?
I did. Listen, I've got a 14, almost 15-year-old. And for the first time last month, she said something about college. And I went, what? Whoa, I guess we're there now, aren't we? Right. So this is hot on my mind in terms of like really starting to think through and strategize like what we have left on my husband's GI Bill, my spouse's GI Bill, and what we're going to do with that. And I love these tips and tricks, right? Because she's only 15 right now. She doesn't have any idea where she wants to go to college quite yet, or even what she wants to do. So that gets my mom juices flowing, right? Like I've got to start to really figure this out so I have the answers when it comes time for her to make those decisions. And
All
this
right,
is
so
where, yeah, sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No. So we've only talked about tuition. Then there's the
Yes.
housing allowance side. And as you suspected, the monthly housing allowance is tied to a military housing allowance. It is calculated using the housing allowance for an E5 with dependents who were stationed hypothetically in the zip code of the campus where the student attends most of their classes. And that can be important because sometimes the main branch of a campus may be located in one, housing allowance area, and the actual campus may be located in another housing allowance area. But
Mm.
this can be a big planning strategy. Again, going back to our previous example, some places have E5 with dependents. Their housing allowance is less than $1,000 a month, and it's about $4,600 or $4,700 a month in San Francisco. So if you have that is definitely part of the planning strategy, right? You wouldn't want to give up that housing allowance at the more expensive location unless you had a really good reason to do it, such as the other kid is going to a very expensive school that has a very generous yellow ribbon program and it's going to cover all their tuition. That might be more than the housing allowance benefit.
Mm-hmm. So with the housing allowance, do you have to prove that the child is living away from home or living
You
not with
don't.
relatives or anything along those lines? It doesn't matter. It's just whatever the zip code is of where the majority of their classes are being attended.
Yes, it is I think of it kind of as an unrestricted benefit. You don't have to use it for housing. There's no accounting. It's just a payment that comes in, sort of like in the military. You don't have to use your BAH for housing, right? You could
Mm-hmm.
live with your parents. You could live in an RV. You could do whatever you wanted to do. And that is just a part of the benefit that isn't accounted for.
Yeah.
Now, I will note that there are separate rates if you go to school exclusively online. There's a whole separate rate for that, and if you go to school outside the country.
Okay. So I know this is a question that's come up multiple times in my circle of friends, but when a child is utilizing the GI Bill, who is actually receiving the money that comes in payment from the VA? I know the answer to this, but I want to make you say it.
Yeah, so this is a trick question. Technically, the payment is supposed to be made into a bank account that the child is in control of. The service member has transferred the benefits to the child. At this point, these are the child's benefits, sort of. What I
Sort
recommend
of.
that people sort of what I
Yeah.
recommend that people do is when they are earlier in the process, before the child actually starts school, they'll have to get a certificate of eligibility from the VA. And at that time, they set up an account. And I suggest they run down to their local credit union and they open up a separate bank account that's just for these payments and to put a parent and the child on that account. How much you disclose of this to your child is completely up to you, and I will make no advice one way or another.
That is the second part of that question, right? Like like what if my 18-year-old can't handle payments into an account without making poor financial decisions. There you go.
I will,
Anyway.
though, say this is an opportunity, right? If your 18-year-old can't make those decisions now, maybe this is, depending on how big that housing allowance is, maybe this is a lower risk place to start building those skill sets.
That is actually some super smart advice, Kate. Yes. Okay, so this has been really good. If I wanted to recap just really briefly, like the main major points of what a transitioning or retiring military family needed to know about the GI Bill, I would throw out the information that if you're going to transfer it to a qualified dependent, then it needs to happen after 6 years of service, but while you still have 4 years of service left. Correct.
That's
That would be
first.
the first
Yep.
one. Throw out another one for me. That's the one that's stuck in my head, right? That's the
Sure.
one where I'm like, that timeline is so important.
The second one is to verify that the transfer went through, and I
Yes.
encourage people to keep records, right? And the third one is to be absolutely sure that that service obligation was met. And that gets dicey if you haven't done it sort of till the last minute. And I know people who have re-enlisted or who have not resigned or not requested to retire because they needed to fulfill that service obligation. And given the amount of money that can be involved in the GI Bill benefit, absolutely, probably a right decision for their family.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Okay. Kate, thank you so much. I'm going to throw up your contact slide. I want people to know where they can find you if they have additional questions, if they would like your consultation services, if they want to dig deep. Kate also has a fabulous website, and I will drop the link to that as well. And she's got some blogs and some articles written about the GI Bill and just military family finances in general that are well worth reading. So let me pop this up here. Kate, can you tell everyone where it is going to be best way to find you?
The best place to find me is either LinkedIn or Facebook. I if you want to actually like have a conversation. If you just want to read, go to the blog. I don't really do anything on Instagram, and I'm just now at this point confused by Twitter. I don't know where they're going. So I really only use Twitter at this point to complain to companies.
Oh, that's hysterical. I think everybody's a little confused about Twitter, but that's very funny. Okay, so Kate, I just dropped in the comments. I just dropped your website. Let me throw that up here just so everyone can see it. Oh, wait, it's not showing. There we go. Right here is where you can find her, and go and visit that. Go and visit her website if you want to read more about it. I mean, I read up on all of this before I ever even asked her to come on this live stream with me, and then I said, yes, this is the woman I need here to help get this information out to transitioning and retiring military families. So thank you so much for that. Moving forward, oh wait, I didn't create a slide, so I'm just going to take this down. So next week, just so everyone knows, next week we are having another live stream, SpouseLink live stream, and that is with Dorothy Graham Odell. Now, Dorothy and I have been we have had to cancel and change the date of our live stream like 6 different times. So we're really excited that it's actually going to be happening. We're going to be talking about Unstoppable Overcomers, the Military Spouse Edition. What does that mean? What is an unstoppable overcomer? When they throw that title of resilience on us, how well do we wear it, and how much of us kind of resent it a little bit also in the end? So join me next Thursday at 10 a.m. Central for our next SpouseLink live stream. Kate, you have been an excellent guest, part 2, since I've had you on here once before. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I really appreciate it. I know our community really appreciates it. What would be your last final word of wisdom that you would throw out to a transitioning or retiring military family, just as our kind of our parting goodbye?
Yeah. Start early, man, because sometimes it feels like you're running in front of an avalanche.
It does, doesn't it? And you know, starting early, like if you think about the time frame that we were talking about for GI Bill, that's a significant amount of time. 4 years is what you're looking at for a GI Bill. And so start early is not 6 months, even maybe a year in advance. If you are anywhere within the 5-year time frame, check out our transition timeline that we have available on the SpouseLink website. Download it and take a look at some of the timeframes that you need to have in mind as you are moving through this transition process. So, all right. Thank you everybody for joining us. We will see you next time on our next SpouseLink Live. Thank you and have a great day.